In our gospel today, we continue to make our way through John chapter 6, which we've been doing for the past couple of weeks. This is the famous bread of life discourse that Jesus is giving to his followers. And it is the high point of the Catholic argument for the belief in the true presence of Jesus in the Eucharist from sacred Scripture. And with this in mind, I began reflecting on the readings this week, and I thought about the movie called Babette's Feast. It's a very famous movie, Catholic movie, or with Catholic themes. It's not my typical type of movie. I like funny movies, and this is not a funny movie. It's a Dutch movie and with English subtitles. It's very much out of my comfort area, but it is a very good movie. And the basic plot of the movie is that Babette is this French woman who has been had to leave France because of persecutions, and she gets set up to stay with these two sisters. They allow her to stay after some encouragement from a friend, and she becomes their cook. And so they teach her how to cook their very simple, very bland meals. And years later, Babette wins the lottery, right? She receives this package with the money that she won, and she convinces the sisters to allow her to cook them a French meal. They don't know it, but she's a very famous and very good cook. The two sisters are daughters of a Calvinist preacher, and they live a very strict life. There's not room in their beliefs for nice things, for enjoyment of life. And so the sisters, along with their guests for this meal that this woman wants to provide for them out of Thanksgiving, they agree that they're going to go to the meal, but they're not going to enjoy it. Right? They'll eat what she fixes, but we're going to do our best to simply do it for her sake because we want to stick to our views. But one gentleman is there who was in the military, kind of got out of this place, and he was able to enjoy the finer things in life. And everything that came out for the meal, he raved about it. Right? He tasted the wine and he said, "This is the most delicious wine I've ever had. Let me see the bottle." And he recognizes it as this very nice wine. And everything that comes, he enjoys and has no problem indulging in. And eventually, as the night goes on and the other guests allow themselves, especially to partake of the wine, they start enjoying the meal. Right? It's a very good movie. If you have a chance to watch it, I definitely encourage it. I thought of this film as, again, we're going through this Eucharistic discourse of Jesus, but also because of the psalm that we heard this morning. Right, we prayed together, "Taste and see the goodness of the Lord." Now, I spent a long time in school. I never really learned about this. And I've always been troubled by this psalm. Right? Taste and see the goodness of the Lord. That doesn't make sense in the natural order of things. Right? That we would taste and see. Taste and sight are two of our five senses, but they're not related. Right? We don't gain the ability to see because of eating things, except maybe carrots, right? I'm not sure if my parents were telling me the truth, but they told me that carrots were good for my eyes, maybe just to get me to eat them. But if anything, it should be see and taste. Right? I see the food on my plate, and then I begin to eat it and taste it. Right? It doesn't make sense in the natural order of things. There's no natural connection between taste and sight. And so the connection that is being spoken of must be supernatural. Right? And there are several scriptural accounts that sort of point to this connection of tasting and seeing. Right? The chosen people, as they're wandering through the desert, they're given manna from heaven. Right? They taste the manna, they eat the manna, and then they see, in a certain sense, God's goodness. Right? God's care for them, God's nurturing them. Also at the Last Supper, right, the apostles ate with Jesus. They tasted the food. And in a certain sense, their eyes were open, right? They saw what was going to unfold. Especially when they looked back, they were able to see what Jesus meant whenever he said that he would have to go and suffer and be raised on the last day. And then maybe the most famous of these accounts would be the road to Emmaus. Right? These two disciples of Jesus are walking along the road with him. They don't recognize him. Right? This is after the resurrection. And they invite him to stay with them. They eat with him. And they say that it was in the breaking of the bread that their eyes were opened and they were able to recognize Jesus. Right? So they tasted and they saw. Now, what does all of this mean? Well, go back to this movie, Babette's Feast. What happens during the course of the meal is that in addition to the guests allowing themselves to enjoy the food, they also allow themselves to enjoy each other's company. Right, which may seem sort of simple, but there was underlying trouble in their little village. Right, there was a lot of arguing, there was a lot of bad blood, there was a lot of tension, and so they sort of had to put up with each other for a while until they enjoyed the meal. But then, once they tasted, right, their differences were put aside for a little while. They didn't disappear, it wasn't a magic act, but they were able to see each other in a new light and overlook their differences in order to enjoy each other's company. Right? Their hardened hearts began to soften. In a sense, they tasted, right? They saw the goodness or the sweetness of the Lord, and they were also able to see the goodness of each other. Again, they didn't overlook, or their differences didn't magically disappear, but they were able to look beyond them and see that the person themselves was good. They let down their guards and they were able to let each other in. And so what is happening can be, I think, best summed up by a great teaching on the Eucharist. We say that whenever we consume natural food, right, I eat this delicious steak, I take the steak into my body and I make it part of myself. Right? I take the nutrients from it, I use it to fuel my body, I consume it and I turn it into what I need. But with the Eucharist, it's the opposite. Right? When we consume the Eucharist, we are transformed. Right? We become what we have consumed. Right? It transforms us from within to become like what we consume. And what we consume is Jesus. And so the more we consume the Eucharist, the more we are transformed to be like Him. Right? Taste and see the goodness of the Lord. And I read a little article on this movie because I'm not very good at picking up on themes on my own. I usually watch something or read it and I say, oh, that was nice, but I don't really get it. And so I read an article about this movie. And two things struck out from that article. The first one is this. The author says that the beauty of the film is found in watching this conspiracy of silence melt away in the enjoyment of the feast. Right, so these guests had come and said, we're not going to enjoy it, right? We're just going to come, we're going to put up with it for her sake, but we're going to just be silent. And the villagers, as long as they did that, robbed themselves of the joy that was presented to them, right? The joy that was going to come to them through this eating of the food, but also through the company that they shared. And it's the same for us. Right, if we refuse to come to the table, if we refuse to approach the altar, to consume the Eucharist, or if we refuse to allow it to transform us, right? If I say I'm going to go to Mass, but I'm not going to pay attention, I'm not going to pray during the week, I'm not going to allow it to transform me, then we rob ourselves of the joy that comes from consuming the Eucharist. The second thing that jumps out to me from that article was this quote. He said, Babette did not preach at them. Rather, she invited them to the beauty of the feast, and it was this lived enjoyment that melted away their distrust and even enabled them to find healing and forgiveness in their lives. And so I think that this is a model for us. Right? That we don't necessarily need to go and shake our fingers at people, right? Why are you sinning? Why are you a terrible person? You need to confess and you need to come back to church. Right? Sometimes we need to be stern with people. But I think that this is an example for us. That if we are truly encountering the Lord, especially in the Eucharist, if we are allowing ourselves to be transformed by consuming Him, then we are going to live lives of joy. Right? We can't help but be joyful if we truly experience Jesus. And if we live out that joy, we are going to be like Babette, right? We're going to share the goodness with others. They're going to be attracted to the goodness, and they are going to want to follow us to the table. Right? That is our sort of our way of evangelizing, especially, I think, today when people don't like to be preached at. Right? They want to see examples of joy. So taste and see the goodness of the Lord. And we're all called to do this, and it's effective. Right? I mentioned that I'm the vocation director. I'm in charge of trying to get new priests. And one thing that sort of stuck out to me as I wrote this homily is a statistic that I've heard recently, that around 75% of newly ordained priests say that they were doing regular adoration before they entered seminary, when they made that decision. They were regularly spending time adoring the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. Right? They themselves tasted and saw the goodness of the Lord. And that transformed them, and it made them want to follow Jesus in this particular way in their lives. Right? To become a priest or to become a religious brother or sister. It not only opened their eyes and their hearts to His call, but it gave them the grace that they needed, the strength that they needed to be able to follow that call. And so we pray today that we would continue to come weekly to the altar, right? To consume the bread of life, to consume the Eucharist, to receive body, blood, soul, and divinity, Jesus Christ, so that He can transform us from within and make us like Himself. Let us continue to taste so that we can come more and more to see the goodness of the Lord.